This particular webinar came out of a particular experience which I had when we were working with some of our clients. Um, I run a video marketing business. I run YouTube channels for myself, for my clients. And in that process, one of the best forms of content in terms of analytics, in terms of reach, in terms of generating leads for our clients happen to be podcasts. When we experienced this ourselves with our clients, I really thought that there's something which a lot of B2B companies can replicate with ease, to say the least. And I really wanted to show you what our structure is, something which you can replicate with very little investment, and it can give you significant ROI. So, without any further delays, as I said earlier, that please keep on asking questions in the chat. I love to take up questions, especially in sessions like this. And as and when I'm going through the presentation, if you have any doubts, don't hesitate to ask the question. I have the chat open here. I have a couple of monitors. So that's that. So let's get started, shall we? Now, I titled this podcast. Oh, this is mirrored. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So I titled this particular webinar "Best B2B Content Marketing Hack," which is starting a podcast. Uh, well, if you're not aware of what content marketing is, I urge you to check out my superpeer.com/Nikhil Bhansali page. I've done a couple of webinars on content marketing and how B2B businesses can use it. But a podcast in itself makes quite an incredible hack in the sense that the ROI which you can achieve when you have a podcast in terms of lead generation, in terms of inquiry generation, is just incredible. And it's been a surprise to me as well, as we've done it for some of our clients, as we've done it for ourselves. And this is something which you should really consider. And I'll make the case as we go along in this presentation of why you should consider it and how it can help you onboard B2B clients, which are some of the most lucrative clients consistently, right? So let's get started. The first things first, why B2B customers go ahead and even make a purchase? Now, this is a question which I've had to think about a lot. And in our various marketing efforts, what we have narrowed down most of our thought processes into is three aspects. I think B2B customers primarily make purchases because of trust. They need to be able to trust that you are a thought leader in your industry. They need to be able to trust that you know what you're talking about. And they need to be able to trust that your company is not going anywhere. B2B customers don't want to deal with companies which will, well, shut down soon. They also make decisions based on what their competitors are doing. And this has been a quite interesting revelation to say the least, that okay, they really closely observe what their competitors are doing. They hire from their competitors and ask those employees, what is my competitor up to? And finally, and this is of course pretty much a common thread amongst any sort of B2B customer or any customer for that matter, they're looking at how financially a particular product or a service can help them. They're looking at financial gains. Now, of course, there's various other reasons to think about, and these are what I believe is these are 60-70% of a reason why a B2B customer ends up making a purchase. Uh, now, now that I have an understanding of this, I want to get into what are some typical approaches. What are some typical approaches which B2B companies take to sell to their customers, right? What are some typical approaches? Well, if you have a good uh, if you have a good digital marketing team, for example, they'll do a lot of content marketing efforts. They'll create emails, they'll create blogs, they'll create case studies and send it out. The other one, which a lot of B2B companies do, is straight up just cold call, cold email, right? Now, I am specifically looking at non-reference based leads or inquiries, guys. And then apart from this, I have seen a lot of B2B companies invest in events, exhibitions, or expensive consultants who can get them entry into a lot of their clients and things like that. Now, here's the problem with each one of these approaches, at least in my opinion, is the first thing is none of these approaches really highlight and showcase the personal aspect of a business owner. So, what do I mean by that? Well, think about it like this: the company as a whole is going to make a purchase because of trust, competitors, or maybe some sort of financial benefits. But as a individual who is making that decision, he typically is looking for someone whom he has a personal connection with. And none of these approaches actually create that sort of personal connection. Second, other than some very high level content marketing, as a company, you are not establishing yourself as a thought leader in your space. And a B2B company always wants to work with a thought leader, someone who is probably defining a new kind of service or a product in whatever industry you're in. And finally, I also believe that none of these approaches give you a good amount of face time is the amount of time you're actually spending interacting with that customer and trying to understand their problems and things like that. And this is where the typical sales process fails for me, in the sense that sure, I'll get some sales, but it'll be really inefficient, or it'll the activity is something which I'll have to consistently keep repeating again and again, again and again. I have to repeat this process, and it doesn't really scale that well. So you will be like, okay, Nikhil, I understand. I mean, what you're trying to say, but the problem is this: that marketing doesn't work for B2B companies. And I've seen so many people who have used this sentence, or who've told me this, including some of our clients in the past. Marketing doesn't work for B2B companies. The thing is this: the marketing approaches which you are taking are not really marketing, but are sales. You're not marketing, you're selling. And there is a difference between marketing and sales. And later on, as I go deeper and deeper into this conversation, I think you'll understand there's a very nuanced difference between these two. And marketing does work for any company, for any industry. It has to be catered or customized to that industry. For a consumer brand, if you go out and spread pamphlets, it can result in sales for you for sure. That's not going to work for a B2B brand, obviously, because those are not motivators enough for a B2B brand to engage with your company or to work with your company. Marketing does work if you do it right. Now, the easiest parameter which I have found, right? The easiest parameter which I've found, and the way I like to approach this problem of making sure that I have face time with my client, making sure I have uh, spending sufficient time with them, this is going to directly increase my sale, but I don't get face time with my client. The reason I don't get face time with my client is no one wants to get sold to. And what do I mean by that? If every single conversation you're having with your prospective clients is about sales, about trying to sell your particular product or trying to sell your particular service, I honestly want you to try to sit on the other side of the table and see the kind of relation you'll have with that person. All he's trying to do is he's trying to sell to you. That's really turning off. You will definitely get some sales. I like, for the company which needs your particular product or service, you'll obviously be able to sell to them. But as I said earlier, this does not scale. You will always be stuck in the sales grind, in trying to get more and more B2B clients. And every single time you'll have to repeat the same process, and there'll be a lot of rejections. And typical B2B sales will convert less than like 5 to 7% of your total inquiries, which you end up getting. So what's the solution for this? The simplest thing you can do is you invite your prospects, people you're engaging with, your prospective customers, if not today, maybe in the future, not for a sales presentation, not for a product demonstration, but to interview on your company's podcast. Now, you'll be like, okay, Nikhil, like, why the hell would they even come? I mean, why should they give their time for a marketing activity which I am doing? So you got to understand that anyone across the globe who is working in a B2B space, who's at a senior management level, whom you will be trying to sell to, is looking to establish his or her own thought leadership. They want to showcase their own experience, their own knowledge, their own intelligence amongst their own social hierarchy, amongst their own peers. And by inviting them to an interview on your podcast, and we'll talk about what sort of discussions you can have with them which are not sales related. You're giving them this opportunity, number one. Number two, in a sales process, this is something which I'm sure a lot of experienced salespeople would have encountered. They Most of these customers typically have their guards up, because they know that you're trying to sell to them, so they don't want to engage with you really. But it gives face time with your client in an environment where their guards are down, where they're opening up and they're having a conversation with you. And of course, as I said, right, it'll help them stand out amongst their peers, amongst their competitors, whatever it is. You're giving them this outlet. And you will be like, okay, how do I even, ask them to come to my podcast? Now, of course, say you've made first contact, maybe on LinkedIn, on email, or whatever it is, or you've got a reference, and at this moment, maybe he's not buying from you. That's completely fine. You'll be like, hey, I'm sure you guys will take your time. Your capex has to get released, or whatever it is. You have other decisions to take in place. Let all of that happen. We have a simple podcast where we'd like to talk about whatever industry you're in. So I'll give you some examples a little bit later. But for instance, say you're in a HR company, right? So we want to have a discussion with you about the changing HR culture in India. We want to have a discussion with you about attrition rates. And that's whatever those topics will be specific to your industry. Say there is some sort of, I don't know, you have a financial product. Speak about the financial conditions of the country, or speak about like how the export market in India is growing, whatever is specific to your specific niche. I mean, you can let me know in the chat box what companies you guys are working on, and I'm sure I'll be able to come up with some topics on the fly what you can discuss with him. Tell him that it'll take 30 to 45 minutes of your time. You'll share the questions beforehand, and we're not going live with this unless you are happy with whatever you have spoken. If you don't feel something's not, if you feel something's not right, we'll immediately delete the whole thing. Absolutely no pressure on you. Tell him that there's no need to talk about his company at all, and you also don't try to sell him your product or your service at that point of time, or ask him questions about his company, because there's restrictions on what he or she can talk about. And finally, tell him it's just a simple Zoom recording. I will send you a Zoom link, you'll join in, I'll record it, and that's it. It's just a conversation about whatever your generic topic is. Now, I would urge, I can see there's quite a few of you here. In the chat box, please add, the whatever your question, whatever your company's background is, and I'm sure I'll be able to give you some topics which you can propose to your prospective clients. That okay, hey, we're having a podcast about so and so topic, which will most likely get a yes from them. And once you do this, once you've been able to invite these people and start doing some podcasts, the next thing which happens, my next important question which we'll have is, okay, so how does it really help me? First thing is, it helps you build a deeper connection with your particular prospect in the context which is not a sales conversation. And that's really important to understand. That typical conversation which you'll have with your prospect is just about sales. You don't know him outside of that. So by having a conversation with him aside from sales, it really builds a deeper connection. The second thing which has been a revelation for us also is, once you publish this podcast, the video format, the audio format, whatever it is, and you tag, your competitor, your particular prospect in the LinkedIn post or whatever, the competitors of that company reach out to you on LinkedIn via personal message, asking about what it is all about. What happens is this, I'm sure you do this, you stalk what your competition is up to. Similarly, your prospects competitors are also stalking him, and when he does something, when he publishes something with someone, that will attract attention, and that's exactly the kind of target audience you need. And even if that particular prospective client doesn't become your customer, the competition ends up noticing this and may end up signing up for your service or your product. And this has been truly remarkable to see for us. And finally, it a lot of B2B sort of prospects, or a lot of B2B sort of projects are not closed in the first sort of conversation, right? It takes 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is, to actually close that sort of deal. And you can't have every single follow-up call with your client just asking him, hey, we've sent you a proposal, can you give me an update? I hope you get what I'm trying to say, and I'm sure you get frustrated when you have to follow up and engage with your client and figure this out. But imagine that you're telling him that, hey, I'm inviting you for a podcast, and after you publish it, you're sharing it with him, and he's sharing it internally in his company. And what this does is gives you another reason to engage with your prospect, to get more face time with your prospect apart from sales. And that's really important, because that's where business gets closed, in my opinion, at least. And that's how it helps you. So you'll be like, okay, Nikhil, this makes sense. I am interested in starting my podcast. What exactly will I speak about in the podcast? How will I structure it? So what you do is this: you introduce yourself in the podcast, you introduce your client in detail, and hype him up so that he gets excited that, okay, like, he's really hyped me up and he's done his homework, he's seen my profile and all those things. And in the beginning of the podcast, before you start your Q&A session in the Zoom recording or whatever format you use, you set up a structure that mentions all your questions you will be discussing. You have general questions. General questions are questions about your industry, about the specific topic. Next, you have news related questions. News related questions are basically, in your industry, what are some specific news which has happened recently, which you're sure your prospect will know about, or if he won't know about, he'll be interested in. Then you get into some opinion related questions. Couple of opinion related questions. We're asking him his opinion on ABC, and ABC can be whatever happens in his industry. You're asking him about some sort of problem which he's facing and how they're solving those problems. This is you probing and understanding that, okay, where does this company stand, and him opening up. It can be related to his company or not related to his company, and that's really important to understand, that you don't have to always ask him questions about the company until and unless he's very comfortable talking about it. You ask him questions about some value propositions which your company solves without mentioning the name of your company or without selling to him. These can be 2 3 questions, and then this will tell you very clearly if this particular prospect is legit or not, in the sense that, do they really have the problem which I'm trying to solve or not. And finally you conclude it. And a podcast like this, spend about 5 to 7 minutes per answer. You have a beautiful 45-minute broadcast which is very content dense, which has a lot of information, which a lot of people can gain. Now, while I'm moving on, I really would like to see a lot of you have joined in. Please uh, put in the chat what kind of companies you run, so that I have some context and I can probably come up with some ideas for you while you are here. But one important thing to note, that in the podcast, treat it as a separate content entity and don't try to sell or even mention your company at that time. And I'll tell you how you'll get leads out of it a little bit later, but be very, very clear with this. This will turn off people and you'll not be able to get sufficient interviews or a point. You'll not be your goal has to be to get your prospective client to lower his guard. Only then will this particular format work. And if you try to sell to him, it's game over. Like, it's definitely not working. And then moving on, after you create the podcast is where the magic starts happening. What happens is this: that now that you have a piece of content, you can distribute it across platforms and gain a lot of visibility for your company and for your brand. How? You distribute audio version of your particular format through a free app called anchor.fm. Here your podcast gets published on Spotify, and from there you can get it published on Apple Podcast and Google Podcast and various other podcast networks. You upload the video on YouTube, the full video on YouTube. The You take your blog and you get, say, an intern to transcribe it completely, and you publish that podcast as a blog, and that gets you some additional SEO content, related to your industry. Next, from that one full video, say a 45 minutes or so podcast, you can create 4 or 5 7 to 10 minute videos, snippets, when you've spoken about specific topics, and you publish this as well on YouTube and LinkedIn with the right kind of titles and tags. And then the podcast, because you've discussed so much, you've spoken, your client, the prospect has spoken about a lot of topics in your industry, you convert that into a content marketing slide, and you distribute all these formats of content on email as well, as an educational piece of content for not just that prospect, for other prospects like him. Now what ends up happening is a lot of these other prospects will end up thinking whether that client is doing business with you or not, that he is your customer, because, well, that's how it works. It's just uh, it shows your thought leadership, it shows your expertise and experience in this space, and that's what will help you, get more and more quality leads. Also with B2B, this was another important aspect which we saw. What ends up happening is there is multiple people who are decision makers. Okay, so when there's multiple people who are decision makers, once you create a piece of content and you distribute it across all these platforms, LinkedIn, YouTube, email, whatever it is, the chances of these multiple people noticing your piece of content increases and helps build your trust internally in that person's company as well. The chances of you winning the deal increases a lot more because of that. Next, some challenges which you will face when you're setting this podcast up. Now, guys, while I'm talking, I urge you to, again, if you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. And this particular recording will be available as well. So, uh, on the same link. So, getting the first 5 podcast guests will be really, really hard. I would suggest initially, if possible, if you have a good relation with your existing clients, asking them to become your podcast guests because you already have a relation with them. It requires a good amount of time commitment. I would say 4 to 5 hours a week minimum to set up the whole thing, to record it, to publish it, etc. uh, you will need to be very comfortable having a conversation about topics around your industry, something which you'll have to research on. And then finally, you'll need to understand how you can make your guest comfortable. I have seen typically when you say to someone that they'll be incredible communicators, but when you say that, okay, this is getting recorded, for whatever reason they just become really stiff, and you'll have to get them comfortable and start opening up to you so that you can extract really good kind of content. And after using Zoom recording for a while, you can use platforms like Melon app or Riverside FM, which are paid platforms which will get you better quality of podcast recordings. But this is much later, after you've published like 50 episodes or so. Now, another thing to keep in mind is a good target to have is trying to publish 1 podcast a week. That'll give you sufficient amount of content to distribute and increase visibility across all your social platforms, and increase visibility for your target audience. That's important. And after that, as you build it up, as you gain more and more customers, as you increase your budget, you can get into some paid softwares like this. By the way, for one-to-one recording, Zoom is completely free. So just keep that in mind. And there's multiple people involved is when you need the paid plan, but for one-to-one, it's completely free. And that's it, guys. Now, here are some examples of some podcasts which have worked in India and in the global market where these companies have become huge. Springworks has a very nice podcast. It's an HR management software, and they've done an incredible job with their podcast. What they've done is they just approached all the senior level HR reps across India and interviewed them about their career, their experience. And this has helped them get so many clients. Springworks is it's a huge company now. The Pain Point podcast is by Zoho. Zoho runs Zoho CRM, Zoho Mail, and all these different softwares which help you sort of. And the Pain Point podcast is where they discuss specific pain points which businesses face. Globally, I have really loved Shape of Work and Rework. Both of them are from the Basecamp team. Basecamp is a project management software. There's many, like SaaS Open Mic is another one. It's by a company called Chart Mogul, and it's really well done. And then that's it. I mean, these were just some examples, but there's plenty of them more. Just follow some guys who continuously upload on LinkedIn. I'm sure you're gonna get it. And that's about it, guys. This was a very, very quick uh, presentation which I set up, and I wanted to educate you all on some of the stuff which we learned, which really helped increase visibility and increase